Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa, Motorsport, and ScooterWest.com. So this is the final part of the full comprehensive 12K or 20,000 kilometer service on your BV400. It's also very similar to the BV350. I've done videos on servicing a BV350 in the past, so I thought I'd show the BV400 because there is some small differences. I suggest watching the first two parts of the video, the 6,000 mile service video for the BV350, because you'll need to do all those steps. You're going to need to change your dry belt, the air filter, the variator weight, and also the hub oil. So in order to do the valve adjustment successfully, you want to have all the parts handy. You're going to probably likely need a lift like this, a proper motorcycle lift. Doing it in the garage with no lift is going to be very difficult. The laser iridium spark plug, it lasts 12,000 miles. A lot of people want to replace the spark plug early, but they do last 12,000 miles, sometimes even more. The specific plug for the BV350 is an MR7BI-8. The Scooter West part number is MR7BI for the original NGK spark plug. You're going to need a valve cover gasket, A80662, and then you're going to need these three gaskets for the bolts that hold the valve cover, and those are 830249. So three of those. A lot of the other valve covers would use 6 of those. The items you're probably not likely going to have to successfully do a valve adjustment. Valve measurement, yeah, you could do that, but if they're out of specification, you're going to need to make an adjustment. These are sets I've had for a long time. You can see my name Robot on all of these. I bought these years ago. I used to do a lot of services on motocross, 4-stroke motocross bikes in the early 2000s and late 90s. So that's how I end up with these shim kits. And essentially they're a whole assortment of different shims, different sizes. You even see used shims because they don't really wear out typically. You just have to exchange it out. If you're doing this at home, it's quite a bit of an investment just to buy a shim kit to do a valve adjustment. You could certainly measure with the feeler gauge if it's, you know, 0.05 millimeters too thin or too thick, and then you can go to another shim. Sometimes the original shims are even smaller increments. They get the adjustment really close, but the replacement shims are in 0.05 millimeter increments, and they're either 7.5 millimeter shims or they're 9.5 millimeter shims. All right, so there's quite a bit of preparation before you do a valve adjustment. As you can see, they got quite a bit of body work on these scooters. So I'm gonna go through all the steps needed to prepare the body work to do the valve adjustment, along with a little access hole for the spark plug. So first of all, you wanna take off the left floor mat. It's got several of these little rubber plugs, along with these ones on the side too. And obviously the first time you take it off, you gotta be extra careful. Sometimes I'll put silicone grease on all these so they slide in and out a little bit easier. Over time, sometimes you can break those little plugs off. Next, you're going to want to have your T25, your T30, and a T40 Torx driver. You're going to start by removing this foot peg here. And we'll start with the T40. A lot of times I'll break them free with a T40. And if you have something fancy like a power driver, I don't have a T40 bit for it, but they're just enough to grab the bolts, and you can just quickly get them out of the way. You know, pretty much spin the screws. Actually, leave those 2 screws behind in the foot peg right there. And with a T25, you're going to need to remove this last screw right there. One more T25 that's kind of hidden right under here. A little easier without that plastic belt cover in the way. And then we're going to transition to the T30. Go ahead and snap that in if you have a power driver. So there's 2 step screws that are underneath that rubber floor mat. So at this point, you can see this feels a little bit loose right now. Kind of start from the back here. They have these gripper clips, and they have quite a bit of friction to break them free. And I think there's like 5 of them, if I recall, or 6. There we go. Actually, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so I was wrong. and that removes your side panel here. If you want to remove the other side, all the same steps is pretty much symmetrical. The next step, we're going to remove this little cover right here. T25 Torx driver, you got a hidden screw right here. And right here above the tank, it's actually a P30. And it's a little bit shorter step screw. And I think there's last one or two, it might be a little hard to get with the power driver. And it's kind of right here in front, like right below where the radiator is. And then there's one more underneath right here. So right about here. So set those pieces of hardware aside. The one that doesn't have a tip goes on the bottom. So the pair of screws just to the side of the gas cap. And they're just like those ones on the bottom with no tip on them. So it's got just like that floorboard. There's a couple of gripper clips. Keep in mind sometimes these want to fall off as well. Such as this clip. This is one of these clips. See how it's just very loose? You can just give it a little squeeze. We have these available on scooterwest.com. I think they're CM 017410. I think it's a part number for these clips. And they're pretty inexpensive. Same with the gripper clips. That's a really long part number I don't quite remember. So at this point, it kind of exposes more of the body work, some of the connections. We'll go ahead and disconnect that ground a little later. So go ahead and remove this cover. There's two screws that hold that. You get access to the top of the motor. Maybe a wise idea to disconnect the negative battery terminal as well. Keep in mind if you drop the seat close, won't be able to easily unlock it. So I got a quick little tip for you. So say you just want to close the seat so I can turn this light off. You could pry the light off and disconnect it. But if you actually click that latch down, at this point, if we close the seat, it will turn the light off, and then you can just easily lift the seat. Just make sure you don't sit on it in that state, but sometimes you want the seat up or down out of the way. Probably the quickest way to do that, you could remove the seat, disconnect the switch. So many ways to do that, but that's typically what I'll do, and make sure I release the seat before return the scooter to the customer. So I have the front wheel clamped, and I have a scissor lift. We sell those on the Scooter West web store. Pretty useful for doing several of the services on pretty much any Vespa or Piaggio scooter, any two-wheeler in general is pretty nice to have. So now it's somewhat supported. I don't have all the weight taken off, but at this point we're going to go ahead and remove the two lower mounting points for the shock absorbers. All right, so a 13mm socket, this lowermost shock mount. Go ahead and break it free. This nut is actually fixed to the bracket. I do have a little bit of Loctite on there, and there's only so much room. You could remove the exhaust. Technically I'm going to do the tires next. I could do that, but it's not 100% needed. So you got the friction of the Loctite that's on the thread, so using a 13mm ratchet wrench. And if you're, so that shock's loose, and we're gonna go ahead and move on to the left side. All right, there's a little cover right here that is part of the rear wheel fender. Two step screws, T30 driver will get those screws out, kind of lift it, kick it up, set that aside. And you have that same 13mm nut. May need to use the extension on here. 13mm bolt. Same thing, break it free, then we can get the ratchet right on there. At this point, if there's a little pressure on it, you may need to adjust your scissor lift that's in the center of the frame. If you have too much, it's gonna bind up the screw. There's kind of a sweet spot where you'll be able to pull it out. There we go. And now that shock can come free. I'm gonna start tipping the motor up. You can see the tires still staying put. The shocks are like actually separating, so the motor is lifting up. And we're gonna start finding some of the lines that we're gonna need to disconnect. So here is 2 hoses. We'll go ahead and disconnect this little clip right here. Sometimes I'll just, so I don't have more screws around, you can put the screw back. It does kind of take a little bit more time, but it's not so bad. So that little clamp right there. There's some wiring for the starter motor that you gotta slacken up a little bit. And I think the ground wire is probably gonna be okay. So pretty much this right side cover needs to come off. We're not gonna take this upper tunnel off. And a T40, and it's pretty much all the same steps as the left side. All right, so there's a cable clamp for your rear brake here. Go ahead and loosen that with an 8mm socket. Single screw here. Leave the screw with the little bracket. And at this point, you can even get access to the spark plug much easier than through that little door that they have for you. And you can reach in there, kind of just grasp the spark plug cap and pull it straight off the plug. And anytime I'm servicing the plug, I usually pull the whole spark plug wire out to inspect it. If there's any sign of deterioration or arcing or any problem where the dielectric grease is falling apart on it, you know, there's no sealing, you know, because you don't want to be out on a rainy day and this arcs out. Pretty inexpensive parts, same carryover part as the BV400. And at this point, you can get a 5/8 socket on that spark plug. So you want a wobble style. That's going to make the job much easier. Since this scooter's at 12,000 miles, you just go ahead and replace the spark plug. All right, so at this point, we're ready to start lifting the motor. And pretty much we're going to pivot the motor so the cylinder head's pointed more up and down. Have that one loose. This is the critical one. Sometimes you need to slacken. This is your ABS rear wheel speed sensor. You got to slacken up these wires right here. Just watch all the wires all around. Watch the hoses. That's why we got this bracket disconnected. And at this point, no center stand. Just keep on lifting the scooter and watching these cables. But the limiting factor is usually going to be that brake cable on the right side. So I'm kind of reaching through here to feel when that gets about, just starts to get tight. And all these cables are starting to get a little tight, but they're fine. Fuel lines aren't pulling or doing anything weird, so we're good there. And at this point, I think that's about as tight as I want to get, and we're going to lower the scooter, so we'll work on the valve cover from the top down. All right, so now we're going to work from inside the pet carrier bucket. Without the cover, everything's still pretty tight. And you can see one of the limiting factors, you got a coolant hose that's kind of going right across the valve cover. There is a little release for one of the clamps on the coolant hose. It gives you a little more slack. It's way down there. I reached way down there. And it gives us a little bit more slack to move this around. The other thing we'll do is we'll go between jacking the motor up and down to kind of get the best articulation. You're going to have 3 10mm, or you're going to need a 10mm socket for these 3 fasteners here. And they have these rubber spacers. You may need a small extension for that single. And one other thing, make sure it's all clean. This motor's fairly clean under here, so may want to pressure wash the engine before that. And you have these rubber gaskets that we'll go ahead and replace. And for instance, if you were going to flush the coolant, this would be a good time to drain your coolant, because then you could just disconnect this upper radiator hose from the thermostat and it'd give you even better clearance. But we're not changing the coolant on this scooter. It's not quite 2 years old. Not quite loosen up the hand. There we go. Spin that out by fingers. I'm not using gloves today, so you get a little better feel on the bolts. Of course, you're going to get grungy. I'll use a small extension. So with a little wobble on there, that makes it a little easier. And be careful because this is a pretty sharp edge. It kind of tears your hands up. Much easier. You don't have the articulation to swing a wrench. Those power ratchets are kind of a lifesaver. So at this point, tip the valve cover out of the way. Gasket's staying behind with the valve cover. And you'll be able to pull the valve cover right up through there. We're gonna go ahead and replace this gasket as well. And just to show you something, there used to be, these two were drilled out for valve, the 5 bolts. The modern designs, they went to 3 bolts. Probably the same cost, of course. So it's 3 bolts now. It used to be 5 bolts. So if you're doing this on a BV400, you'll see they have a 5-bolt setup for the valve cover. So now I'm gonna go ahead and turn the motor over without the spark plug in there. And I see the exhaust valve opening. Now the intake, which is the top valve opening. And now I'm gonna start looking for this dot, or a drilled out spot, which coincides with that pin right there. And we're gonna line up with the very center of this valve tower right here, or the rocker tower. Just has to be pretty close. And that's essentially top to center on your compression stroke. So right about there, there's a drilled hole right here, and it's pretty much parallel with the top right there. All right, so obviously we'll do the easy valves on the top, the intake. We're looking for an ideal clearance of 4 thousandths or 0.10 millimeter. And let's just test it with the 0.1. So that drags a little bit, has a little bit of a drag between the face and the actual shim. So that one feels good. I'm gonna do it on this right valve right here. And it goes in there pretty easy. The increments of the shims are 0.05 millimeter. So let's see if 0.15 fits in there or 6 thousandths. If that fits in there, we'll probably go one size smaller with the shim. So that one does slide in there pretty nice. I'd probably go a little thicker on the shim. Same with this side. It's, you know, you probably could get away with this, be acceptable, but I could see a little drag. We'll even try the 0.20 and 8 thousandths, and that definitely isn't going in there. So I think we can get away with shims that are going to be thicker, because I can't get the 0.20, but I can get the 0.15, but my ideal clearance for this is going to be 0.10. So just to eliminate some of the rocker noise, that would be a good scenario there, is to go a little bit thicker on the shims. And we'll see how the exhausts are. Usually the exhausts are on the opposite. They're actually usually tight. I know what I want to do with the intake shims, go 0.05 millimeters thicker for both shims. We'll see what's reading in there. Unfortunately, the exhaust, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing. That feels really nice. The 0.15 is dragging just perfect in there. The 0.20 will not fit in there. Let's try 0.15 on this right side exhaust valve. And of course, you're doing it all by feel. I mean, you could probably look right below. That drags very nice in there. It just has that perfect drag. There's like a small amount of drag. That's a normal clearance. So I think all we're going to do is make an adjustment to the intake valves, but it's pretty much the same effect. And like I said, you're going to need a full set of shims. You're going to do this at home, or you're going to have to do some calculations. Yeah, that feels pretty good. Yeah, that's nice. So that's 0.15. And the way we're going to go ahead and adjust the valves, you can shift this rocker over by removing this plastic retainer. So one of the easiest ways to get this plastic retainer out is get like a right angle pick. There's a hole in this plastic, and you want to pull it straight out. And be careful not to get it too crooked. So, and sometimes you can even just get a little screwdriver, pop it off the rest of the way. Just like that, kind of fell to the ground. Show you what this little retainer looks like. Has the 2 holes in there, it just snaps in place. And at this point, I'll show you the trick we can do right here. And obviously exhaust is gonna be much harder if you do need to adjust it because they're facing down. Go ahead and kick the rocker over. You'll be able to pull the shims out. And you may wanna use a magnet. We're only gonna go pull out 1 shim, and a magnet kind of works the best. Sometimes you clean the shim off and there will be a number on it, but oftentimes it's worn away. So that's what these calibrated shims look like. So I went ahead and cleaned the shim off. I can't quite read the number. I see a 2 on there, so it's definitely over 2 millimeters. And you want to have a good set of either a caliper or a dial gauge, so 2.84. Let's go up to a 2.9. So 290 shim, probably about 2.85. And that's how we're gonna go close the gap up. We're gonna go thicker on the shim. If you're wondering how this all works, there's of course other videos. We're gonna put that one in here. 2.85 is what it's closest to. And then we'll find a 2.9. I like to do it one at a time, especially when you have a shim kit. It's pretty difficult to do it at home if you have to record all these and keep track. I mean, you could certainly keep track of them. I always double check them, even though I did see the measurements on there. So 2.9, that's a little thicker, so that's, you know, close enough. And we'll go ahead and set that shim in there. Just drop it right into the top of the valve. And if you're wondering how thick these are the 9.5 millimeter shims, or 9.48, I think is what they are. And then we're gonna move over to this shim here. Measure this one. This one already looks a little thinner. Make sure you have it zeroed out. 2.75, and we'll go for a 2.80. Oftentimes, you sometimes can shuffle the shims around, so 2.75 is what this one's closest to, which goes right there. And our 2.80 is right here. Again, we'll double check it. Lock that up so I don't have the shims flying everywhere. Perfect, 2.80. Go ahead and set that on top of the valve. And at this point, we'll carefully lift the rocker and slide it over. We already know our exhausts are good, so we're good right there. Make sure that's shifted over, and you snap this little black thing right back in place. Makes 2 snaps. Just double check the valves. So we're gonna get our 0.10 4/1000 feeler gauge and run it right between there. So, and there we go. Nice little drag to it, that's perfect. And it's got a nice drag as well. So that's probably exactly the spec that we're looking for. If it was difficult to put in, I'd probably go back to the thinner shim. Sometimes you gotta go 2 steps to get the correct clearance. That was just 1 step in the shim, so kind of just to give you an idea. I would inspect the chain, it looks fine. They don't really have too many issues. At this point, we'll make sure this surface is clean. So I got a rag here, and we'll prep the valve cover, put the gasket in it, and put that valve cover back in. So go ahead and separate all the rubber. These are disposable, and they only kind of are good for like 1 use. So take our valve cover gasket, A80662. Parts are pretty inexpensive. It's not worth trying to reuse them. And as you can see, it's got the 1 ring. Just go ahead and snap that in place. You could use grease to hold it in place, but I find that these ones tend to stay in place just fine. Work your way around. There's like little tabs that kind of thicker parts of the gasket that kind of hold it in place. Look all the way around, see that? Give it a little push. Make sure it's just seated all the way in. So that's about where you want it. You could put a small amount of grease on the outside edge there. Yep. There's one part I do put grease on, is gonna be this well right here, because sometimes it wants to squeeze the bushing out. And I'll show you a tip. My technicians actually told me about that. These ones don't have too many problems. You put a little grease on there. Same with a small amount on the gasket. It's not gonna hurt anything. And at this point, we can kind of carefully drop the gasket or the whole valve cover back into this hole right here. Of course, you got that hose, that pesky coolant hose in the way, and shift that out of the way. And kind of, I'm going from under and pulling the valve cover up onto the head. So kind of as I'm lifting the, and one thing is if you drop the motor a little bit, the hose won't drag as much on the head. But I'm kind of looking for the most visibility of everything, accessibility. Obviously, that's where the motor is kind of lifted the most. And just get it set in place. You may want to look around all the way with a flashlight. Make sure that gasket didn't pop out of place like it did. I'll show you what I mean. So the gasket kind of popped out right here. Just because I'm kind of dragging it over that hose. There we go. I think it's staying in place. Kind of feel your way around. You may want to use a flashlight, look all the way around. And of course, we'll start with the easy two. Take a brand new washer, drop that over the bolt. And you may need to move the valve cover around just a little bit. These actually thread into the nuts that actually clamp the head bolts down. Go ahead and get those started. You need to shift the gasket, because those are definitely the easier one to get access to. Use my power ratchet. And I don't want to tighten it all the way, I just want to get it started. We'll do the lower right side. Of course, started by hand. On the lower one, you could actually reach it from the right side. I got my ratchet right there. You can kind of see me tighten it down. I'm not going to try to get the power ratchet in that spot. So they're not all the way tight. Now we're going to go work on the most pesky one. Sometimes this rubber thing will want to pop out, and just make sure it's pretty dry, no grease on this one. The techs have actually super glued this to the bolt. I have the grease so the gasket will spin in that little boss right there. And I'm of course pushing a bunch of wires and everything else out of the way to get access. Go ahead and get it started. It's pretty hard to get like a straight shot on these screws. And obviously you don't want to strip it. And start tightening this up. Could just cheat. You can see there's not much room to even swing a ratchet. All right, and then I look for that rubber bushing. It didn't pop out, because sometimes they want to pop out. I'll cheat again. Nice to have these power tools. And you'll feel a distinct stop when those bolts bottom out, and that's as far as you need to go. If you want to get a torque wrench in there, have fun. About 7.5 foot-pounds, 11 newton meters, I think it is. And you just tighten it until they bottom out. and it relies on the rubber compressing to hold that gasket in place. So, and now we're pretty much got the valve cover back in place. And the rubber's not popping out a little bit right here, but it's not too bad. A little pesky on these parts. Now it's time to put the spark plug in. MR7BI-8 NGK spark plug. You don't really want to touch the gap because you end up breaking the electrode. They're iridium electrodes, so they're pretty fragile. And with the wobble, you can see it's actually possible to even do it while the head is swinging up. Obviously, it's easier once it swings down. Using the 5/8 socket. Get it started right there. And that's a wobble. If you don't have this style socket, you just wait until you drop the motor back down. I'm just doing it this way so you can kind of see what I'm doing from the top. And go ahead and tighten it. Usually a half or so turn, compressing the gasket on this plug is all that you need. So take your cap, you want to have some dielectric grease. This stuff actually comes in handy. It's a really tacky grease that actually sometimes is good for holding stuff in place. You don't need much, just a little bit. And while we're here, reach in there and push the boot over the cap or over the spark plug. It needs to make a nice distinct snap. If it doesn't snap, time to replace that cap. Then same with when you push it into the coil. It makes like kind of a little bit of a snap. So that's all tight. You don't want that coming loose. It's only a single cylinder engine, so you lose all your power. All right, so at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and lower these shocks, and you kind of need to aim them so they're not bumping into things or breaking your airbox. Kind of watch it as you're dropping it. Still got quite a long ways to go. We're getting close. A lot of these cables will kind of relax, and we're getting pretty close now. Can't quite see where that one is. There we go. So sometimes it needs a little bit of adjustment to get these all in place. That one dropped right in where I wanted it. So this other one's being a little more stubborn on the left side. So we'll go ahead and go back up a little bit and try again. Hopefully the other side's staying. There we go. All right, so you get to approximate, see where the bolt just slides right in. You need to do a little bit of adjustment with a screwdriver in there. So get that eyelet lined up with the hole, I gotta go up just a little bit. There we go. And you see they have Loctite on it. The end, might as well put a little bit of blue Loctite. On the end, so it pop right in there nice, so that's good. And all the plastic panels, I'm not going to show step by step. I mean, you could watch the whole video of how I dismantled all those plastic panels. Probably about 30 foot-pounds. And the rest of it's just in the opposite order of how you disassembled everything. So all pretty straightforward from here out. All right, so all the bodywork's all together. Pull the brake, let's see what happens. So there you go, all serviced up. You can also reset the service indicator in there as well. So that pretty much is everything you need to know to do the major service on a BV400. It's pretty identical to the 350, a couple different parts. There's some nuances of how the bodywork comes off that's a little different between the 350 and 400 model. But I hope you found that useful. It's definitely not the most do-it-yourself friendly job, especially when you're doing a valve adjustment that requires a lift, several tools, and the shims and such. But it's a pretty important step to keeping your scooter maintained. I'll see you in the next one. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. The next video is going to be how to pull the rear and the front tire.